Thanks for tuning in to the ABC Music Talk podcast, the show for anyone interested in the music industry. Continuing on with the coping with COVID theme from my last interview, my guest this episode will give another side to the music industry, one that always straddles the commercial and the human side of the music piece. In other words, the musicians that create it. But first, time for me to remind you all to go rotor your videos. Rota is for artists, managers, labels, or anyone in the music industry who needs to create video content for promotion or monetization. Rota makes it fast, easy, and inexpensive to do all of that in one place. Head to www.abcmusic.co and click the Rota logo on the homepage to access a 10% off discount for the service. Welcome to the show, Naomi Pohl, currently Deputy General Secretary of the Musicians Union. Welcome.
Hi. Thanks for having me.
No, well, thanks for coming to the Halley. Shout out to the Halley again for letting us do this recording in their studio. And listeners may have picked up on the slight emphasis there on the word currently, as I'm catching Naomi as she's mid-campaign to be General Secretary of the MU, which feels like a good place that we should perhaps start with this. So maybe we can do it in this order. Perhaps just tell the listeners what the Musicians Union is, and we might refer to it as the MU. It's typically, I think, how people shorten it down. And then also what a General Secretary position might be, and how on earth did you get to this sort of campaign stage of your life to become General Secretary? So give us your backstory is what I'm saying there. So start with, what is the MU? And then we'll go on.
Great. Thanks. Yeah, so the Musicians Union is the trade union for professional musicians living and working in the UK. So we've got 32,000 members across all areas of the music industry. So working in live performance, in orchestras, in the session world, also gigging musicians, songwriters, composers, across the whole spectrum. And we're a trade union, so essentially we negotiate rates of pay, we negotiate contracts, we provide advice to our members. But also, more than that, there's a sort of collectivism to being in a trade union. So we represent musicians and we're run by musicians. So we've got this committee structure. So we've got a board which is made up of musicians, and also we've got committees in various areas of the country that look at local issues, and also committees that look at different areas of the business. So again, the Live Performance Committee, the Music Writers Committee, it's a really interesting place to work. I've always worked for trade unions, which is quite a niche, and I've worked my way up, I suppose. I used to work for the Writers Guild of Great Britain, which is a trade union for script writers and screenwriters in TV and in theatre, and started negotiating rates of pay for them. And then I came to the Musicians Union about 12 years ago, and I've worked my way up through the organisation, and we're at a point now where, coming out of the pandemic and following Brexit, we've got a lot of challenges as an organisation. Our members have had the roughest time in history.
Yeah, well, and that's kind of what we're going to come to a little bit with the COVID thing as well. So what is a General Secretary then at the MU?
So the General Secretary is essentially the chief executive role.
Very nice.
So you're elected by the members, you then have a 5-year term, and you run the organisation, but because you're elected by members, you generally make promises during your election campaign, and then that's the work that you carry out, that's what you focus on for the next 5-year period. So for musicians, the person who's elected to this post is pretty crucial, because the Musicians Union is pretty crucial in terms of getting musicians a good deal, influencing decision makers. We do a lot of lobbying and campaigning on behalf of musicians. So it is a crucial role, but one of my fears is that this will just pass musicians by, because we have a postal ballot system. So, you have to just hope that musicians will open that envelope and use their vote.
Right, okay. So not digitised then? You haven't got to that? Okay, all right. Well, there's scope. Maybe that's one of your manifesto pitch. No, I shouldn't be advising you on this. It's a terrible idea. Okay, very good. And but so you gave us a little bit of your background there, but coming out of university, is this what you thought you'd do with your life?
Well, no, I guess, but I studied theatre and drama and English at university, so I was really passionate about theatre and I wanted to work in the arts. And my first job in London, I worked for the British Museum actually.
I only went there for the first time the other weekend. It's amazing. It's fantastic.
Gorgeous.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah, and I used to sit in the Great Hall, the kind of central hall there with the reading room, and I used to sit there and give advice and, it's like the information desk. But also, it snowed once. You can imagine the great glass ceiling there covered in snow. It was really eerie and strange.
Oh, wow.
It was quite a cool place to work as my first job in London.
Definitely.
But also I worked, out of hours, I worked for a little tiny pub theatre in Islington.
Right.
And that's how I made the connection with starting work at the Writers Guild. And I guess I've been really passionate about representing creative people and trying to get them a good deal, and that's how I've ended up staying in the trade union movement.
Yeah. So, and sorry, I forget if you said already. How long have you been at the Musicians Union?
About 12 years.
12 years. Yeah, that's a lifetime in jobs in the music industry, isn't it? So well done for your perseverance and your service, I think, is the best way of putting it.
Thanks.
No worries. Very good. Okay, so let's now turn our attention to the subject of this episode, which is coping with COVID. And we have a bunch of things to cover. So now, as I always do with my interviews, I have a little chat with the interviewee prior to, and we settled on this as an idea. In fact, this was one of the reasons why I'm doing this sort of series of coping with COVID through the conversation that you and I had. And I wanted to ask, as I've been curious about this, and the sort of the backstory to this is, at the time I was working with a record company that had somebody based out in Shanghai, and so as the COVID pandemic started to hit, of course, China was the first one to sort of globally, demonstrate that there might be a problem here. But it wasn't until March 2020 that we had the first government lockdowns. As far as the Musicians Union's concerned, when was this first an issue, something you felt like you had to deal with, or was it like pre the lockdown, post lockdown? Like when did it sort of take roost?
Well, it feels like it hit within a week. I mean, my colleagues and I were talking about the fact that we were actually in Glasgow for a meeting really shortly before that first lockdown. And we all travelled back and, people were beginning at that point to talk about having heard of the coronavirus, and it was beginning to be in the press. But I don't think we had any idea that it was going to hit the music industry in the way that it did. And then suddenly it feels like within a week in March, suddenly everything was locked down. All of our members' work was cancelled overnight.
Yeah, of course.
Suddenly the kind of nature of our work had completely changed.
Well, and that's, I think, what we're going to now get onto. So it really was a kind of, as it took hold of the country's infrastructure, I suppose. That's when it really impacted your members and therefore the work that you were doing, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
I guess that makes sense. I was just never sure like how much sort of preparatory work was ever done anywhere, quite frankly, because I don't think any of us knew what it was going to be, right?
No, not at all.
No, very, very good. So what were the sort of first requests from members that you started to get? What were the first things that really started to impact?
Well, firstly, it was kind of very quickly musicians were falling into financial hardship.
Right.
So a lot of our members are freelance. A lot of them earn kind of 20 grand a year, maybe 30,000 a year. They don't really have savings. They don't tend to have pension funds. So there's not much of a safety net there for a lot of our freelance members. So very quickly we were seeing financial hardship and musicians getting in touch with us saying, all my work's been cancelled. They were asking for advice on their contracts to see if they were due any cancellation fees. We were getting advice on force majeure. We were getting advice on frustrated contracts. So essentially something's happened which has meant that this contract has kind of fallen away, your obligations have fallen away. So we were giving that advice out to members, but we also opened a hardship fund really quickly.
Okay. So I was going to cover financial assistance because you had mentioned the hardship fund, so maybe let's just skip straight to that. So was there something unique about how that started? I think you mentioned crowdfunding, was that right?
Yeah, well we put £1 million in from the union's financial reserves, and And again, we made that decision pretty quickly because it was clear that our members were going to need urgent help, and we needed to do that. So we moved £1 million into an account. We had no idea at that point how many applications we were going to get, so it's very difficult to establish like what level of grant should we be offering, because we don't know how many applications we might get, how quickly the money might go. But we also started crowdfunding, and it was brilliant that members were organising online gigs in order to raise money for the hardship fund.
Oh, wow.
And we also had some donations from different organisations. For example, PPL, they made a couple of major donations which really helped. And every donation, you think about it in terms of how many more musicians are we actually going to reach with this. And it ran for the whole of the pandemic. And we even had some funds left over, so we're still offering COVID hardship grants if musicians are suffering financial hardship as a direct result of the pandemic.
And I think there was something else you mentioned that on the sort of just on the financial theme that you did. Was it subscription holidays for the fees?
That's right. Yeah. So we also thought, there's a potential that we could lose a lot of members here, because our members pay an annual subscription. Most of them pay by monthly direct debit, and obviously, if you're not earning, you're going to start cutting all your direct debits out if you can. So anything non-essential might go. So we thought, well, we want to keep members in membership, but also we want to keep providing services and benefits to them and advice. We were trying to get advice out every day by email on as the restrictions changed. So we wanted members to keep having access to that. So we did offer a subscriptions holiday. It started off as being 6 months, but I think in the end, musicians were able to get a 9-month subscription holiday in total.
Oh, very good. I guess because it's one of those weird ones, isn't it, where, I mean, that's the structure of your organisation, that's just how it works, and it's not an unusual one, it's sort of, club memberships or whatever. But of course, for them to then be forced out because they can't afford the subscription just at the time when they actually do really need, for the first time maybe, the sort of help that you guys produce. Difficult one to manage that, but so well done for getting on that quickly. And so you've mentioned the performance getting pulled, because of course that was, like, for many industries the big thing that really impacted, because literally the doors were shut. I mean, I have I've mentioned on this podcast many times, I have an interest in a little bar, and it was that March 20th, 2020, when the doors shut, and that was a real moment in a brand new fledgling business's moment, and that's the business side. But of course, for musicians, that would have been that sort of thing, because we had some live music in the bar. That wasn't a venue that was available anymore, as was any others.
Yeah.
So were there cancellation fees built into contracts? I mean, what was there any protection?
Not a lot, I've got to be honest, because unfortunately it was this event which essentially meant that the contracts couldn't go ahead, the events couldn't go ahead. So, we took each case individually, so we looked at the terms of the contract, and if there was a possibility of arguing for a cancellation fee or trying to negotiate something, then we would do that. But the kind of broad principle was, this is a force majeure situation. It's almost like act of God level. Right. It's, the government are imposing a lockdown. So government restrictions mean the event can't go ahead. And that means that the contract terms kind of fall away to a certain extent. Wow. Again, it depends on the individual kind of contract and how it's worded. But it was a bleak situation.
Yeah, because there was a real trend for promoters in particular to... they weren't necessarily refunding ticket prices. They were sort of keeping them back for future events. Did that have any benefit at all to the musicians themselves that would, be the eventual recipient of a piece of that ticket price?
Well, potentially, because the idea being that I guess the work would be postponed. So, if you could have your event postponed rather than cancelled, at least there was a chance of that event going ahead in the future. And obviously some events moved online, so there was potential to still get a fee as well. But in the early days of the pandemic, nobody was doing online events, so it took a while for that to get up and running. Most of our members were doing a bit of online teaching, but again, even that took a while to get up. So to start with, it was just a case of absolutely no work for anybody. I think the recording studios reopened first. And we helped to develop some guidance for health and safety around the studios and social distancing. But yeah, it was a really gradual process for things to reopen.
And I'm sure it was a bit of a process because, and excuse me for the slight slur on the government in the UK, but they made a few changes, didn't they, as it sort of went along. One minute it was okay, next minute it wasn't, next minute it wasn't, and it was very confusing. I mean, for a small little bar, it's my sort of lens that I can sort of see it through. You know, we were constantly having to change what we were doing, you know, in terms of the PPE that we had to use and the process that had getting people into the bar. I mean, what was it like sort of trying to navigate that, you know, from your point of view?
Well, I mean, it was the main thing that we were doing, actually, was kind of, certainly at my level, we were having a lot of conversations with the industry. So we were having to rapidly respond and get advice and guidance out on a pretty much daily basis to members, telling them what was okay and what wasn't. And, you know, we were on calls with all these different operators in live music and live events. So we were on calls with like the wedding industry,
right,
who were talking about similar issues. And obviously at weddings you have musicians. There's a connection there. But we developed a kind of a relationship with the wedding industry for the first time as an organisation, because all of these industries that rely on live were affected in similar ways. But yeah, I mean, we were just pumping out the advice and guidance to members on a really regular basis, and I hope that was something that made it was a really valuable service, I think.
Yeah, I guess at least they've kind of got a support group, like, you know, support to lean on as that changes, because otherwise I'm sure it'd be incredibly isolating.
Yeah, and we had to do it at a devolved level as well, because obviously Scotland and Wales and Northern Ireland had different restrictions at different times.
Oh, so actually, so the MU covers which territories?
Yeah, the whole of the UK.
Whole of the UK, right? Okay.
Yeah, so we've got. Actually, Wales and South West England are kind of together in one. We've got one office for that area. Right. So they were having to deal with providing advice on the restrictions in England and the restrictions in Wales. And then our Scottish office also look after Northern Ireland. So again, they had two lots of regulations to try and navigate. And
if I understand correctly, that's still ongoing, because Scotland and Wales are still looking at this differently?
That's right. And I'm really concerned about what happens next, because I think the fact is that every engager or employer or venue has got health and safety responsibilities towards anyone that they engage, right? So they're going to be considering, do we ask people to wear masks? Do we ask people to test? But they're going to have to make up their own mind on that. So what I'm worried about is that we're going to see a total inconsistency, and I'm worried about anything that might prevent a musician from being able to go and do their job. And also, of course, if lateral flow tests are no longer free, but you're required to test for work, are you going to be paying for that out of your own pocket? It should be the employer or the engager paying. But it depends on who you're dealing with. Maybe the BBC will do that, but will a little venue do that? It's you know, it's going to continue to be a mixed bag, I think.
So tough, isn't it? Really, really tough. And so, I mean, actually, testing's that was something that just dominated people's lives for so long. I mean, and still does in certain parts of the world, as we're, I guess, talking about. So, I mean, that was, I guess, probably one of the other things about if even in the periods where musicians could be in a venue or in a recording studio or whatever, I guess they had to turn up before they were originally booked for, and things like that. I mean, does that have an onward, sort of downward impact on their general lives? And
yeah. So if you look at the West End, for example, we had to put in place a variation agreement. So we negotiate terms and conditions for all the West End musicians.
Right.
But they were having to come in, and they still are, having to come in an hour and a half before work, unpaid, to get a test, wait for the test result before they can go and sit in the pit and actually do their jobs.
Oh, wow.
And obviously we want to protect their health and safety. We wanted to make sure that they were able to go to work and not contract COVID, not only for health reasons, but also because if they contract COVID, suddenly they're off work, potentially. Are they getting sick pay or not? You know, it's been an absolute nightmare. I think our members have been incredibly patient with it and incredibly kind of compliant and understanding. But, you know, I'm sure that a lot of our members are also now looking forward to all of those restrictions falling away and trying to get back to work as normal. Unless unless you're a clinically vulnerable musician, in which case you're probably really worried about what the future holds. So we're not out of the woods yet.
For sure, and of course it's not even just about the individual. It's about their home situation. Maybe they're living with somebody who's more vulnerable, and so there's always that. It's such a difficult one to navigate, to know what to do here, and trying to make rules for one doesn't always fit the other.
Yeah,
very, very tricky. So let's talk about some of the other things. So I know that you've been looking at the bullying and harassment, and there's some campaigns that you've been working on. Can you tell us a little bit more about that and its relation to the situation with COVID?
Yeah, so when the Me Too movement kind of kicked off in a big way following the Harvey Weinstein case,
right.
We started to question, and people were actually getting in touch with us from the press to say, is there going to be a Me Too movement in the music industry? What might that look like? Are we going to start seeing people being called out for bad behaviour?
Mm-hmm.
Now, we sort of early on decided that what we do is put out a call to kind of invite members to come forward with any experiences that they'd had. So we held open meetings around the UK, which were quite well attended. I went to one in London, and there were maybe 25 musicians who came along to tell their stories.
Wow.
And then we opened an email account, which is safespace@themu.org. And we opened it up to anyone working in the music industry to essentially say, share your experiences with us, particularly looking at sexual harassment. And we've had hundreds of reports since then, and it's quite quickly we realised that there is a serious problem in the music industry. We do need to do something about it. It's a problem with the culture of the music industry, and it's not just one type of workplace. It's not just studios, it's not just orchestral settings, it's music teaching. A lot of students got in touch to say they'd had really negative experiences at college or conservatoire. Awful. I know. It's been absolutely awful, but I feel like we're beginning to get a bit of traction now from the government and from the music industry, actually acknowledging that there's an issue and looking at ways that we could take preventative action.
Right. So the acknowledgement of it is definitely the first step. And I've covered International Women's Day twice on the podcast since I've started doing it, and the fact that there's a dialogue, the fact that we're talking about gender inequality is, and I know that's only sort of one aspect of that can come into harassment or bullying. What are the sort of initiatives that you think will come out of this? Have you got any favourites that you think will be really impactful?
Well, one of the things that's being discussed at the moment is the potential of a regulator for the industry.
Right, okay.
So it's something they're looking to introduce potentially for TV and film and theatre first, but it might be rolled out to music, and it could be an independent place for people to go and make reports. So the Safe Space service we offer, we listen, we believe, we're here to campaign. Obviously what we've been doing is trying to gather a sense of what issues there are and where they occur, and we've been using that in our talks with government and with the industry. But I think having an independent place that you could go to get an investigation would be particularly important for freelancers, because obviously music industry is heavily populated with freelancers. That's one of the reasons that we have this issue, because they don't tend to be covered by policies and procedures that employees are. And so if you've got multiple freelancers making a complaint about another freelancer, if there's no kind of employer involved, where does that complaint go, and who will investigate it? So I think that could be really important. I think having somewhere independent that people could go would be a great comfort. But I also think if they've got powers to put sanctions in place, it could also act as a deterrent, which is really, really crucial as well. So, yeah, I think the issues that we have in the music industry are late night working, freelance work environments, informal working relationships, imbalance of power, and some of these issues are seen elsewhere in the creative industries. So the kind of government roundtables I've been attending have been attended by representatives of fashion as well, and, as I say, TV, film, theatre. So, I think that's a really interesting development. And I think there's going to be an industry code of practice. However, a code of practice is not going to change things on its own. We've got to adopt a zero tolerance approach, really, across the whole of the industry.
Very good. And so you just mentioned the government there. Do you, and is that a large part of the work that you do as well, like being the interface, because let's face it, you know, if you're a jobbing musician just doing weddings or whatever it might be, you're never going to like speak to a government official necessarily about key policy change or whatever. So is that a large part of what you do day to day?
It is, yeah. So
right. How's that? How do you find that? Are politicians fun to work with?
Well, we get a lot of support. It's interesting. I mean, there's certainly been recent Secretary of State for DCMS that we really had very little contact with. Right. So trying to get the contact is step one.
Right.
And then you want to build a relationship with somebody. I mean, we've got lots of really supportive Labour MPs, but we're building a network of more supportive Conservative MPs as well. And it tends to be per issue. You know, they're not going to blanket support everything that we do, but it might be that they're really passionate about music streaming, or they're really passionate about the bullying and harassment issue, trying to address that. Right. So you want to build those connections. So I actually find it fascinating. It's something I really love doing as part of my job, and I think we're getting better at influencing the government. I mean, during the pandemic, what's been interesting is that we've spent so much more time on Zoom, just face to face with government officials, talking to the Secretary of State and ministers more often.
Right. So have they been a bit more available then because of the dynamic of that meeting arrangement?
Yeah, they have. And I think they've taken a more active interest because the industry's been in such a crisis.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, we've definitely had more availability, which has been really good. And incidentally, you were talking about the bullying and harassment issue, just saying, you know, I think I wondered, will this go on hold during the pandemic? Because, you know, people are working from home more, they're online more, they're not necessarily meeting face-to-face or going out in the evenings after work or whatever. But it's not been the case. You know, we've continued to have reports throughout.
Wow.
And I think, that's kind of shocking in itself.
Has it changed at all in terms of type and form of bullying and harassment?
I mean, you do obviously see online bullying and harassment, and sometimes you see like inappropriate text messages, that sort of thing.
Okay, yeah.
And in those cases, you've actually got some evidence, because one of the problems we have is, you know, lack of evidence when something's just happens in person and it's not witnessed. It's grim. It's really grim.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure. As you were saying about it, was I forget exactly the form of it. I think you did some sort of open forum originally. Was it with 25 people?
That's
or something?
right.
Yeah. I mean that must have been harrowing to listen to some of the stories.
Yeah, and it was, and you know, the minute I got into that meeting, I mean, we'd had Rape Crisis had trained our staff beforehand, and we actually had somebody there from Rape Crisis as well, because it's really important to make sure that survivors are getting appropriate support.
Yeah.
But yeah, we saw young musicians coming in with boxes of tissues, and you think, wow, what are we getting ourselves into here? Like, this is quite a serious issue, of course. And you do hear some really dreadful stories. I mean, one of the first stories that I heard from someone at a meeting like that was she'd basically had someone completely take over her life. It was kind of coercive control. They'd taken control of all of her finances, and she ended up leaving the industry because she felt like she had no other option.
What a shame. What a
terrible
shame.
Yeah.
And what are you able to do at this point? Is it just a sort of a sympathetic ear initially to then try and turn that into some sort of action? I mean, do you signpost to legal advice and organisations that help? I mean, is that sort of the form it takes?
Yeah, so initially we signpost to support services. So if there is a sexual assault case, for example, then it's important that they get appropriate support from an organisation like Rape Crisis. And there's various different organisations that we kind of flag up. But the next thing we do is I would talk to the person. Usually I'm involved in dealing with the cases, and then it has to be survivor-led. So it's a case of what is it they want to achieve and what's within the realms of possibility. So I've come to understand the term kaleidoscopic justice. It's not...
Oh, okay. No. Explain that. That sounds great, because I might steal that.
Well, yeah. So I heard this from on a course that I was on, actually. And basically, it's very rare that we get proper legal justice in these cases. These are cases where, on the whole, the survivor hasn't gone to the police, and they want to report to us. It might be a historic issue or whatever. But we try to get some form of justice that means something to the survivor. So sometimes it's just that they want the person to be called out, or we might approach their organisation and say, this happened on your watch, it mustn't happen again. It's about trying to stop that from happening to anybody else. And we do provide some legal advice where that's appropriate as well. So there are cases where we've managed to get some form of justice.
Okay,
fantastic. But yeah, it's not, it's not always proper legal justice, I would say.
Wow, it's a hell of a responsibility to take on, I would have said, to be sort of at the forefront of that for people. But I guess that's the point, right, of musicians' union in one area, at least. Yeah,
well, I suppose we always dealt with things like bullying, discrimination and harassment in the workplace as part of our roles anyway, but this was kind of honing in on something and providing support to people beyond our membership as well, because I think we just felt that was the right thing to do. Yeah,
very good. So we're in the UK, and... well, in England, we're out of our restrictions.
Yep.
I mean, what has changed that you think will never come back?
Oh, that's interesting. God. Well, I hope... I'd love to say nothing. But I do think that people feel a bit differently about travelling and... so I think what I would say, maybe this is a more positive way to flip it.
Okay.
I think what's come that will never now go is all the online communication. So, Zoom meetings, I think, are here to stay. Online events, probably. Mm-hmm. I think people are going to be quite uncomfortable about losing social distancing in environments like a theatre pit, where you're actually really up close with other musicians. I don't know, I'll be interested to see how that goes, because I think social distancing has been incorporated, so orchestras are still operating with like 1.5 metre distance.
Right.
So I'd be interested to see if that does drop away. Maybe musicians won't want to be crammed into workplaces with no ventilation like they used to be.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because you sort of, I don't know whether you've noticed or not, but I've been travelling on the tube a little bit, and it does feel like people have almost just forgotten and they've just gone back, sort of returned to type, so to speak.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I think it will be interesting. But I mean, I agree. I think the usefulness of a Zoom meeting has definitely other video conferencing technologies are available. Yeah, goodness, I get in trouble for that, I'm sure. It's created such great efficiency around. I don't know. There was something that I noticed the other day. I went out for, I think, one of my very first days in London doing face-to-face meetings, but of course my day was still sort of pocketed with these Zoom meetings, and you were expected to be somewhere where you could do that.
Yeah.
And of course, if you're out like running between meetings, you're not necessarily anywhere that you can do that. It's hard.
That is a real challenge.
Yeah.
So because I've been able to do,
because you've been on the campaign trail. I mean, has that been?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, so the campaign trail would usually involve going around the country and talking to groups of musicians. Yeah. Unfortunately, I also got COVID during the election process. So
I'm not laughing at that. It's just the sort of the lives that we've been leading.
I know. So that stopped me. So, I was really conscious that potentially other candidates were out seeing musicians and I wasn't. I was at home. So, but thankfully, we've got social media, and I did have Zoom meetings with musicians. It
sounds like you weren't too sick to be able to do that. But you were obviously contagious, so...
I had one day where I literally was just out cold and couldn't pick... I could hear the phone ringing, but there was nothing I could do about it. I was just gone. But thankfully, it didn't last too long. I mean, obviously it feels like this latest variant isn't quite so...
quite so strong.
Strong, thank goodness, yeah.
Yeah, very good. Wow, okay. So... let's talk a little bit about life at the MU as an organisation. I mean, one of the things that, you may not know this, but the interview that I did before was with an independent record label with the co-founder Chris Goss, and we talked a little bit about some of the challenges that they've had around things like use of the office. It's quite an investment for a small business, a small to medium business. So, I mean, how have you sort of coped at the MU with, where is the office in London?
Well, we've just moved to London Bridge.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Very good.
So, funnily enough, just before the pandemic hit, we decided at Christmas, just before Christmas, we sat down and we said, right, we're going to sell the building. So we had this massive building near kind of Kennington Oval area, and I just didn't feel it was doing the members any good. Like, this massive building sitting there, members come for meetings, but really there was a lot of staff just knocking around a half-empty building, it felt, and it was quite expensive to run. So we decided that we were going to downsize and we were going to find a rented premises. So we moved to London Bridge, which is much smaller. And then it turns out, actually, that was absolutely the right thing to do at that point in time, because now we're moving to hybrid working.
So explain your hybrid working. How does that work?
So we've got members of staff, most of us, I think, are going to be at home working 2 or 3 days a week, come into the office, once or twice a week or whatever. So it's just like a mixed scenario.
So a friend of mine works for a particular publication in the music industry. I was catching up with him, and he said, yes, well, we're all twats. And I was like, I don't think you can say that. And he said Tuesday, Wednesdays and Thursdays in terms of their working. And I was like, oh, that's actually really clever.
Right, yeah.
That's right, that was good.
Absolutely.
I
haven't heard that one.
So is it something similar to that?
Yes, it is.
So you're saying that you're all twats, which is excellent, and you heard it here first. No, I'm kidding, listeners. I'm kidding, of course. And did you have new people start? Did you sort of have to go through that iteration of new people starting the business?
Yeah, we did. So trying to train people up. Well, what's been funny is the laptops and mobile phones flying around the country, because it's been like, you get somebody starting and you need them to get up and running, so you need to provide them with the kit. Normally they'd be coming into the office on day one, sitting down at a desk, and they'd have their computer. Mm-hmm. Well, so we've been trying to provide people with laptops and mobile phones. So you have somebody who's leaving the organisation who's based in Scotland, and you've got someone joining the organisation based in London. Trying to coordinate getting the laptop and mobile phone from A to B has been a bit of a headache. I mean, this kind of practical stuff, like trying to get couriers to do, it's a headache.
And somebody's got to organise it, which they didn't have to organise before.
Yeah, me.
Yeah, oh, right. Oh, I see. I see. General Dog's Body, is that what we're going with?
No, I'm sure I would have colleagues who say, hang on a minute, I'm pretty sure I did that.
No, that's all right. Everybody pitches in when it's like that.
Yeah.
So the musicians that you represent, I mean, how... Because one of the things that came up with the interview with Chris was that they also tried to put together, wasn't exactly, actually, did he call it a hardship fund? I forget now. It's something like that. That they, as a small label, offered to the artist that was signed to the label, because it's a dance label and a lot of them are DJs. So actually, a lot of their money really comes from their DJ work. So they lost that. So then they were almost solely reliant on their recording income. And so he tried to do that, and he said actually, not too many of them needed it, because some of them just kind of got up and did an Amazon delivery job. I mean, have you found? I mean, all power to people that have the ability to just to sort of get up and fight for the next day. Did you find that you had a lot of members just going, "Yep, we're gonna have to do it this way instead"?
Yeah, we did. We really did. And again, a lot of musicians didn't apply to our hardship fund because they wanted it to be there for other people who they felt needed it more.
Yeah, amazing, yeah.
But we did. A lot of our members ended up going and doing delivery driver jobs. So you've got, again, musicians in the West End who are kind of at the top of their game in regular work, going off and getting a driving job and not performing. And the problem is as well that musicians need to perform and need to practice in order to keep the standard of playing up. So it's been really challenging physically and psychologically for musicians having to take that time out.
Yeah, actually, I mean, so I'm a failed musician myself. I've said that a few times in this podcast. Formerly a classically trained trumpet player. Now, it's quite a loud instrument. Yeah. Obviously, you can get practice mutes and all the rest of it. But I guess, like with people that have had challenges of working from home in perhaps a shared, house, therefore they're in amongst a whole load of other people and therefore confined to their bedrooms. Musicians, presumably many are in the same sort of spot. Right. Yeah. I mean, how's that been? I mean, have you been able to offer them any sort of respite at all?
Well, I mean, in terms of practicing at home.
Yeah, practicing. Yeah, I guess because you mentioned earlier that recording studios were one of the first things to sort of open up again.
Yeah.
Was there any sort of rallying cry for rehearsal space spaces to allow people to come in for free and things like that, or did that not really happen?
Not really.
What a
I mean,
shame.
unfortunately, it was a case of you'd only actually go into a physical workplace if there was paid work there, and there were only really, if a studio was open, they only wanted people there who were essential. So it's difficult to get visitors in, let alone
I guess because then that
having people
impacts on
coming
like
out.
cleaning the place. And
That's
things
the
like
thing.
That. Oh goodness,
It's tricky.
It really is tricky, isn't it?
It is, and practicing at home. I remember when I was in one of my early jobs at the MU that we used to regularly deal with members getting in touch to say that their neighbours had complained about them practicing at home.
Right. Yeah. This was, I guess, where I was going with the whole trumpet
Yeah.
analogy. Yeah.
Really challenging. It's difficult to know how to deal with that.
I mean, what do you do, right? I mean,
Yeah.
there's a point, isn't there, where I don't know.
It's a really challenging career, but
really is.
Musicians are incredibly resilient.
They
so
really are. And
yeah.
actually, on that point of them being resilient, I mean, what was the MU's reaction to? I forget exactly the wording of the government, but the advice was maybe you should retrain.
Oh, I know. The advert where Fatima Fatima is a ballet dancer, but now she's going to work in IT or something like that. I mean, outrageous. I mean, there was a complete outcry from our members.
Stupid things to say. Go. I mean, that was up there.
I know, absolutely.
What was the official line?
Well, we're running a campaign during the pandemic called Invest in Musicians. So the case that we were making to government is you need to invest in these people because they are incredibly resilient and resourceful, and they're amazingly skilled and well trained. And they invest a huge amount in their own careers, and everything that they do benefits the UK. So not just in terms of the economy, but also just in terms of like health and well-being. Music is incredibly important. It's a great British brand. Let's not let our industry hemorrhage all this talent. But it was like talking to a brick wall, honestly. Wow. I mean, after we got the self-employed income support scheme, we knew there were gaps in it, and we knew a lot of our members weren't qualifying for support, and we kept banging the drum, if you'll excuse the pun, making that case to Rishi Sunak, and we never really got anywhere, to be honest.
Yeah, and one of the other initiatives I think I heard about, and correct me if I'm wrong, was the idea that a government subsidy on the seats, so you could sell, I think, like half the tickets, and then the government would pick up the tab on the rest. Is that?
That was something we wanted as well.
Right.
Yeah.
Did that ever come to fruition?
No.
Oh, dear.
No, because we were saying what the government needs to understand is that venues can't open under social distancing because they can't afford to only sell a third of their seats. So we were saying if the government could subsidise places to open, then that would be helpful. But instead, we got the Cultural Recovery Fund, which was valuable, It's great that the government were going to invest, but it basically went to venues and buildings, and unfortunately, a lot of those places remained closed. So it wasn't actually providing work for our members. Really difficult, really challenging.
Yeah, it really, really is. Okay, so still on the campaign trail as of yet. So I don't know, listeners, whether this will get turned live, and we'll find out whether Naomi's fate is sealed or not. But I'm curious. What are you kind of running on, so to speak? Like, what are your main things that you're telling members that you will do should you get that position?
Well, so my pitch is that we need to build back pay and agreements post-pandemic. So obviously, as we've been talking about, a lot of those things that we've agreed with employers and engagers to get the sector up and running, we need to move back now to getting musicians' pay up. A lot of our musicians have really struggled and suffered during the pandemic. They've been incredibly patient. They need to get a decent pay rise now to reflect the cost of living going up. A lot of our members are not very well paid. So we need to address that. We need to address the impact of Brexit. We need to move music education back up the agenda post-pandemic as well, and also arts funding, because I think when I first started at the union, we used to talk about arts funding all the time in lobbying events, and I feel like it's slipped down, and it's been partly because of the pandemic. During the pandemic, we've been talking about short-term support, hardship funds. We need to now look at long-term stability for the whole of the arts sector. So they're my kind of big pitches, I suppose. But in terms of myself as a candidate, because I'm Deputy General Secretary, I've got a lot of experience. I understand what makes the organisation tick. I understand how we run the organisation. We've got a turnover of £7 million a year.
Wow.
Yeah, we distribute £1 million in royalties to musicians each year, and I've been actively involved in that.
Royalties? Where do the royalties come from?
So we collect synchronisation royalties for performing musicians.
Oh, right, okay.
So if a TV programme uses a track, a commercial track, it's covered under our synchronisation blanket licence. So the BBC pay a blanket licence to us, for example, which we distribute to musicians.
Is it just the Beeb, or does it
and ITV, and Sky, but also we have individual synchronisation licences that we negotiate with feature film companies and advertising agencies as well.
Ah, very good. And so is that your members coming to you and saying, help with this? Somebody's interested in my music, can you help with it? Or how does it work?
No, we tend to get contacted by music supervisors. So they'll say, I want to use this piece of music, and then we would quote according to the number of musicians on the track. Again, it's quite a niche area that people might not realise.
No, I had no idea. That's great. So there is a sort of commercial element to it then, I guess, in a very direct sense.
Yeah, we collect royalties for non-members as well as members, which is, it's a way to make contact with people who aren't members of the organisation. But yeah, just like PPL and PRS for Music, we collect royalties and we distribute them, and we have to get them out to people regardless of their membership status. But yeah, it's an interesting area.
Yeah, definitely.
And I used to be involved in negotiating the sync licenses, which was quite interesting because you'd be quoting for a pop track 1 minute, and then another minute you'd be getting a request for an orchestral track or an excerpt of a film score that might have over 100 musicians on it. So then obviously that's more expensive to clear. But we always just try and get enough money to be able to distribute something meaningful to the musicians.
Yeah, very good. Well, we are coming up on time on the interview. It's amazing how fast that's gone by. So, first of all, thank you so much for coming on and talking to us about this. I think a lot of people are going to find this very, very interesting. Good luck as well.
Yeah, well, I mean, I might still be Deputy General Secretary when this goes out. We'll see.
That's okay, though, isn't it?
That's okay. It's a democratic process.
Exactly. But I wish you all the best. You certainly sound like you know exactly how to help all the musicians that benefit currently. So you'd be a great leader for them.
Thank you.
Okay, so thank you. To my listeners, thank you for listening. As ever, I welcome all feedback, comments and suggestions for future shows. My Twitter and Instagram handles are @AlexBranson, or head to the website where you'll find a contacts page. Also a shout out to the incredible audio assassins who provided the music branding for the show. And if you like this show, please leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you for listening.